1998. We're in Houston, Texas, at the Sheraton. About 3:30. My name's Slade McClendon, and I'll be interviewing Stephen J. Czecha of the C-66. And if you could just start off by telling us a little bit about kind of your family history and friends and where you grew up.
Okay, I'm Steve Czecha, and I was born on January 1st, 1925. And every year a bunch of crazy people celebrate my birthday in New York City. My father and mother both immigrated from Poland and met up through the Immigrants Highway up through Albany, Schenectady, Buffalo, Detroit, and they ended up in Lansing, Michigan. And that was about the end of the line of the Polish Immigrant Railway, and some of them went further south to Jackson and some went on to Chicago. Lansing is the capital of Michigan. It was a small town, about 4 square miles. And it's in the center of the state, about 60 miles from Detroit, which we traveled to a lot later, and about 100 miles from Muskegon, where I had one of my aunts living in there. I have 2 older sisters and a younger sister. They're about 3 years apart, older and 5 years younger. Currently we're all living. I went to high school in Lansing Eastern, played in the high school band, and when I was 18, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And my father was a meat and grocery man, learned his trade in Poland. He had to be a journeyman, apprentice, like you work for somebody for free for 5 or 6 years, and then you get your credentials and can work for yourself as a journeyman sausage maker. So he comes to Lansing, and him and several people like himself that were good meat men were working for Preuss Packing Company, and they did all the making of the sausages, bolognas, and et cetera. And one of the salesmen said to my dad, "You're the reason this business is a success. Why don't you go into business for yourself?" And my dad fell for it and went into business. And it wasn't too good, and the salesman comes around, he wants to get paid for his supplies, and my dad said, "Well, I just don't have any money." And the salesman kept haunting him, and finally my dad said, "Well, if it wasn't for your idea of me going into business, I wouldn't be in this pickle." Well, Dad struggled, worked hard, he made a success of it, and once a week he'd make 100, 200, 300 pounds of Polish sausage, and all his people that knew where the Polish sausage was made would come from 2, 3, 5 miles away and buy a pound or 2 of Polish, and that's all they would buy. He had 2 or 3 store locations, and he finally bought a lot and had a Polish contractor build him a small store. Well, as the kids grew up, they all took their turn in the store. They were the clerks and so on, and I never could cut meat, but Dad worked from sun up to sundown, and I hardly ever saw the guy. He'd be gone in the morning when I got up, and I'd be asleep at night before he returned. However, in those days, meat and grocery business was very profitable, and from 18 to 28, he made a fortune and enough to retire. Took the family, 2 older sisters and myself, to back to Poland, and I think his intention was to live there, but Mother said, well, finally after 6 months, she says, "America's better, so we'll come on back." We rode the Olympic, which, by the way, is a sister ship to the Titanic, and my 2 older sisters were curious what the color of the boat was outside, so Jane was the younger girl. She got, I guess it was Carolyn was the older girl, who went out the porthole, and Jane was holding her feet, and they almost lost her overboard. And of course they never told the parents for several years that they were almost losing each other there. And we got to Poland. I was 3 years old and couldn't speak any Polish to speak of, and all of a sudden I grew up as a Polish child, and after 6 months I could only speak Polish and not English, and when I come back to the States I was like a Polish immigrant. I had to learn English all over. And being quite proud of being American, I didn't like to be called anything but American, and I resisted talking in Polish, although I could understand everything that was said up to about 12, 16, 18 years old, but I just refused to learn the language. I learned it because everybody around me was speaking it and so on, but I wouldn't speak. I would listen. And of course that was a mistake, because later on I'm overseas and meeting up with Polish people and Russian people, and the language would be helpful, although I did have enough that I could speak with Polish and so on. I knew a little bit of German, a little bit of everything. So Dad was working 6, 7 days a week, good long hours, and go back to when he returned from Poland. That was the same year that the market crashed in '29, and all of a sudden the business he was in changed, and people used to come in and buy a week's worth of supplies on credit, and then they'd come in once a week and they'd pay the bill, so it would be zero, but when they walked out the store they owed him a week's worth of groceries. So he had a number of people on the credit line, and when the market crashed in '29, nobody had any cash, so people that used to come in and pay him on Saturday didn't have the money, they wouldn't come in. And since everything now transferred to a cash basis, the ones that had cash wouldn't come and trade with him either, so he lost 2 ways. So he contributed quite a bit of money to support the people in the Depression there. The business never was good as it was before '28, but he did have work all the time. He might only make $1 a day, but he did well. We had something to eat all the time. Of course, usually what we were eating was the fruits that were going to go bad and the potatoes going to go bad. Instead of throwing them out, that's what we had for dinner. So as Dad got older, he kind of, working too long was not good. So he would, he cut out Sundays, and what he did, he'd check his books and cash balance and order his, make up his orders for going to the warehouses the next day and order supplies. And 12 o'clock he'd take off for the Polish Hall to have a beer and cards with his friends, and I'd stay in the store. And one day a guy comes in, he wanted some meat, and of course I wasn't a meat cutter. He said, "Well, you saw your dad cut it." He said, "Go ahead." So I brought out the pork line and cut it like I saw my dad, and I chopped it, and they weren't real good, but they satisfied the man. He was happy to get his pork chopped. One day, December 7th, I believe it was, when the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor, I happened to be working in the store, and I was going to quit at 6 o'clock and go to the movies, as usual. All of a sudden, people started walking in, and all they would say is a pound of butter, and that's all they'd buy. The next one, and then a pound of coffee, and that's all they'd buy. And it was a pound of sugar. So it was sugar, butter, coffee, and people were coming in a steady stream where it never was this way. When a person would come in, the store would be empty for 5, 10 minutes, and then another one would come in. Now they're coming in and they're lining up 2 and 3, and I said, "Oh, there's something different here." So after the store cleared out, I shut up early and locked the door and went down to the Polish home, where my dad was. I said, "There's something going on. People are coming in and ordering butter, sugar, and coffee." Yeah, the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. Well, I was 17 and going to graduate the following June. And the drafting process was 1 year for people a certain age. This was before Pearl Harbor. And the minimum age they would take, I believe, was 20 or 21. So graduating in 42, I'm now 18, and I wanted to get some training and go into defense plant work at the Oldsmobile, so drafting seemed like a good thing. I took an extra year of high school, learned drafting. I went to Michigan State, about 3 miles away, and took drafting there. And just about the time I was ready to go and apply for a job, why they dropped the draft age from 21 to 18. So now I'm draft eligible. I figure, well, people wouldn't hire me. I didn't even try it. I might have been successful in getting a job and getting a deferment, which was being done. It was perfectly legitimate. If you were in a skill that was beneficial to the war effort, they would give you a deferment. And some of my friends didn't work that route. when I came home 3-4 years later, they were married, had a family, had a house paid for. Wages during the war were really going up good, and there was a lot of overtime, so people were making money at home because we needed the production to pursue the war. So I had received a deferment to June because I was a student, and that was pretty regularly done too. And when my term was done in June, I reported to the draft board that I was I was ready to go back to the regular draft. And of course my mother was very concerned, and I think she was against my doing this, but you know, it was something to do, and I did it. And most of the people that went into service would get their notice and report and be inducted and sworn in, and then they'd get 30 days or so to get their business in order before they reported for duty. In my case, I didn't have anything to get in order, so I said, well, I'll be sworn in, and it happened at Detroit, and I'll report right to Battle Creek, which was the induction center, Battle Creek, Michigan, Fort Custer. And my mother was still convinced that everybody got 30 days. She didn't know that that was an option. So when I went to Fort Custer, it kind of confused her, and she was unhappy and all that. But anyway, we got over that, and my sister and her came down and visited me. And before I had gone into service, when I was 17 in 1941, one of my teachers said, well, there's such a program called specialized training, and what you do is take a test, and if you have a high enough score, you're eligible. You can join the program. They take you in the Army, and they give you 90 days branch and material training. They call it BIMC, branch and material basic training. And you can go anywhere from that training, which means no matter who you are in the Army, you get basic training. And after that, you get switched off in specialized training into what you're going to be doing from there. But one of the requirements of the, and we call it the ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program, was that you took the test, got a score. I think it was 115, and I think that was higher than was required for pilot's training in OCS. I believe it was 110. So I was very happy with this program, and went into service. They sent me down by train through the southern states to Texas, and Camp Fannin was a training center just opening up, and they had a 50th anniversary there, 48, and I went back there for the 50 ceremony. Put 450,000 troops through there in basic training, and after our 90 days I went from there. I was assigned to Texas A&M, which was very nice. As I said, Camp Fannin had a 50th anniversary, which I attended in 50 plus 43 would be 93. And we had 125 people come by there, and we were hitting the Veterans Day parade. And the Shriners had these little carts that they drive around, and the Bangor girls, cheerleaders, had a bunch of girls doing the parade, margarette type thing. So we were spiced up on that parade. So at this basic training, I run into two people that I went to high school with in the 10th and 11th grade. They were down there giving training. And one of them was A.B. Rahar, who was a very good basketball player at St. Mary's. They won some championships. And he was teaching the grenade tossing routine. And the other guy, Joe Djokovic, was giving us bayonet training. And I'm thinking to myself, and by the time I get to this bayonet, it's going to be a long way. I'm going to be shooting. So I had my finger inside the trigger guard, and in bayonet training you don't do that. You put the finger outside, because if you're using the bayonet, you're probably out of ammunition, or somebody's too close, you'll be shooting your own people. So he come up there and he took my finger out and put it around. So anyway, we're off to Texas A&M, and it was very nice down there. And they put 3 of us in a room, and there was a tremendous amount of dormitories and a boulevard type arrangement, and we were on one side and the Air Force and the Navy were on the other side, and we'd come out and have our retreats and so forth and make a right left turn and go into the mess hall. So we had about a total of 3,000 people would go into that mess hall 3 times a day in formation, and as soon as one company come in, they'd sit down and eat, and from the first guys coming in to the last guys coming out, it was about 45 minutes. They'd feed all 3,000 people down there. So we got a furlough. We had to go into this little College Station train to get our tickets, and we'd line up, and there was a line from here to there, and it wasn't moving. That guy selling tickets, I think, could sell 1 ticket a day, and he had about 3,000 people to get tickets to. And some of the people knew that you could get on the train without a ticket, and they ran ahead. And of course, the dumb guys that were new didn't know that. But next time we learned you could get on the train without a ticket, so we did too. And it would be crowded. We'd get to Dallas, Fort Worth, and from there up to Oklahoma, be very crowded. And by the halfway to Chicago, then you'd get a seat. Up till then, you'd be standing up or sitting on your suitcase. I'm home on furlough in September, and all of a sudden I get a telegram. Furlough canceled, emergency report immediately to camp. So I thought, well, something important's happening. So I rushed back there as ordered, and I sit around 2 weeks, so there wasn't any real emergency, but we were getting ready to go overseas. And one of the things they decided was the older people maybe shouldn't be sent overseas. They couldn't stand up to the living outdoors and the camping in the rain and all that stuff. So they offered the older people the opportunity to not go overseas. I guess they got some kind of stateside duty. And one of the boys, older guy, says, "Oh, these are my friends. I've been with them so long, I've just got to go with them." So they said, "Okay, you want to go, they go." And we had a fellow, Stan Kulka, who says, "Well, they can't send me overseas. I've got arthritis. It's bad. I can't go." And nobody ever reported him with arthritis. So we get to the embarkation camp after 3 days on a troop train, and they say, when you have these inspections, usually you take all your clothes off and you put a raincoat on and your boots, and that's all you have. He said, "Well, come to this inspection and bring your mess kit spoon and your dog tags." So we did that, and we come in the door and hung our raincoats on the peg, and we walked down one side of the barracks and back across and down the other and back up and picked up our coats and went out. And as we went by, there was a person sitting in a chair every 15 or 20 feet, and I assumed they were doctors. And they didn't say anything or do anything, and the medical examination, in my estimation, turned out to be, if you were smart enough to pick out the spoon from your other things and strong enough to carry your dog tags, that was the overseas examination, and everybody passed. So now the fellow that was going to go overseas with his buddies, we were on 50-50. Half the unit could be on pass into New York. We were just an hour away by train, possibly, Camp Shanks, wherever that is from New York City. And all of a sudden, they were doing this every day for about 3-4 days, half on leave, and then the next day the other half on leave, and then back and forth. And all of a sudden, there's no more passes. We're going overseas. Well, the man that was so set on going with his things didn't come back. He went AWOL in New York by accident or whatever, who knows. So we walked down to the place to get on the ship, and we drove the train down right to the New York harbor, and the buildings are high enough that you can't see the trains. So the troops were coming into town and getting on the ships and leaving, and nobody would ever see them because, you know, you could see them if you knew where to go to look and so on, but the general public just wasn't aware that this was going on all the time. So we get on the ship, and believe it or not, it's a British merchant ship, Empress of Australia, and it was owned by the Germans before World War I, and when the war was over, the British confiscated it from the Germans as part payment for reparations in there. So here's all the signs on the thing. It was a really nice ship with black and white little square tiles, 1-inch tiles, and it had the names, all were German around there. So we all had our details on this ship, and where we slept was down a couple decks, and it was 5 layers, 5 bunks, one on top of the other, one on top of the other. And a man put his bag down, and sergeant says, "Okay, everybody on the deck, he's going to have a formation." And I was like, "You got to be kidding. Somebody just put a bag down where 3 guys are supposed to stand. There's not enough room for everybody to get on the deck." Well, we hassled on that and got through the formation and so on. And our company, C Company cooks, were given the job of cooking on the ship, and the routine was 2 meals a day, mostly lamb, sheep or something. So they looked the kitchen over, and it didn't look like it had been cleaned since 1918, so they wouldn't cook in there until they cleaned it. So they're heating up these big 20 gallons of water, and up on the top of the ceiling, walls and so on, they cleaned it down, then they started cooking. And I didn't have the experience of standing in this line, but I heard it was the same thing every day, lamb stew, and people would look at each other and say, coming out of the line, and say, what are they serving? And it was always bat, bat, up and down the line, bat, bat, twice a day. I got assigned to assist the British seamen. There was, I think, myself and 2 other people, and our job was to serve the desserts for the English officers. And after I tell you how bad the kitchen was and how bad the place where we slept, I could look into where the officers' dining room was, and they'd had these nice round tables, gleaming, shiny, lacquered finished, dark mahogany, silver shining, and crystals shining, and white tablecloths, just like they were at the best hotel in town. Amidst all this other stuff, the officers, they were really living it up. In the meantime, it was a good deal for us guys too, because when the officers were done, there was always stuff left over, and we were eating officers' food, and the rest of the guys were down in the soup line getting the lamb and that. And after a couple, I never went back down there. It was so smelly and unpleasant. I just stayed up on the deck and laid out on my life preserver as a pillow and slept in the nice open air. A couple days later, I went down to get some writing paper to send some mail home, and the first sergeant's eyes looked at me. He says, "Where have you been?" He said, "I've had you marked overboard for 3 days." So we got to England, got a train ride up south of London. I guess it was Tidworth area, about 60 miles south of London, and the V-1 bombs were gliding over us into London. They were sort of at the end of the V-1 and the beginning of the V-2, but they were still gliding them in. And we lived in a place called Windmill Hill, and the tents were the large 8-man tents, and it was a little bit cold, so they issued us a pound of coal per man per month. And of course, we burned all that up in the first fire. We lit up all of the coal for the month, went in one thing. So we're scrounging to build fires, and we didn't know it, and cut some trees. And in places like Europe and England, they just don't cut trees. If it's down on the ground and dead, you can use it for firewood, but if it's a live tree, you don't cut it. We did find that the artillery range, where the tanks were firing and so forth, and the field artillery, which are almost like tanks, they're not enclosed. The shells would come in a canister, and they'd unwrap it, and this canister was made of cardboard impregnated with dark tar, creosote, or whatever, but it would burn. So we got all of these things that we could use, and that's what we build our fires out of, and it smelled terrible, but it kept us warm. Our first meal there, again, C Company was cooking, and Nello, our cook, is a huge guy, 300 pounds, size 15, 6'4", just died about 6 months ago here. He was in charge of that kitchen, and we took turns cooking. We had companies A, B, and C, and we took turns eating. So at breakfast it would be ABC, and at lunch it would be BCA, and at supper would be CAB. We were the last ones through the first meal, and of course there wasn't good planning and there wasn't really anything to eat. There was a lot of coffee and a lot of bread, but nothing else. And I come up to the serving place where they had this 5-gallon can, about half full of, looked like bean soup or beans or something, and the guy is fishing around in there. There isn't anything in there but liquid. He puts one bean on my mess kit, and I take it up to the, each time you have a meal, there's a sergeant, not a sergeant, an officer that looks to see how the meal is going. So I just didn't say anything. I just stopped in front of him, let him look at it, and he looked kind of sick. Not to worry, we had D rations and K rations in the tent, so we went back there and we opened up some rations and got something to eat out of our own packs. Next morning, my friend Bill Bales was on kitchen police, and the truck came in with the supplies for the kitchen, and Bales comes running over and he says, "You guys got to help me unload the kitchen truck." And so you mean after the meal they gave us yesterday, we're going to help unload the kitchen truck? And he says, "You guys got to help me unload the kitchen." "Oh yeah." So we go up there and we get in line with the other guys, and we get a carton of something, whatever it would be, hams. Instead of going to the kitchen, we took it back to our tent. So it was one box for the kitchen and 2 boxes for the tent, and we never were hungry again. One day we had passes, and the mistake was made in the kitchen. They had 2 desserts, and one of them got soap in it. And when you eat food with soap in it, it gives you the, what we call the GI runs. And I went out on furlough, and not furlough, just a evening pass, and I come back at midnight, 1 o'clock, and we're singing all these songs, Milkman, Keep the Bottles Quiet, and all that stuff. And look out at the camp, and it's usually black, and here's all these lights moving, flashlights out, moving, all it looked like a beehive moving. And everybody had the runs that ate this dessert that had the soap in it, and every time they'd go by Sergeant Griggs' tent, he was our first sergeant, they'd slap the tent, and if you're inside a tent and somebody slaps it, it's like you're inside of a drum, and it wakes you up, and they're just slapping his tent, and there's a hubba hubba, and they're slapping his tent, and hubba hubba, and he was kept awake all night, so I imagine he took care of whatever those guys did with that food. We're on our way to France, and we got on to LSTs. LST is a landing ship truck, and the trucks could drive in there, and they come on board, and I look up, and here's a nice truck, and it's got a lot of stuff piled on it. So it looks like up on top of that truck would be a good place to lay down and sleep. So in my work, I was in the infantry, and we rode the half-track, and the way you got on the half-track is you just walked down the hood and over the top or wherever you wanted to, and it was strong enough to hold you. And I forgot that I wasn't on a half-track, so I stepped on this guy's hood and on the top of his cab and got up to where I wanted, and I guess I made some dents in his truck, and he complained to my lieutenant, and the lieutenant asked me, chewed me out for doing that, and of course I was sorry that I wasn't thinking, but I didn't mean to do anything. I just did what I always did, climbed down the hood and up in. We got out of the LST, and the Navy had a lot of food, and our drivers were pretty good guys at getting things, so they got all the gallon cans of fruit cocktail, which the Navy was very happy to give them. So we had a lot of that stuff with us. We got on, and we rode separate from our vehicles. Normally we'd get in our vehicle and the vehicle would drive. Well, the vehicle went empty with the driver, and the rest of us got on the back of a cattle truck and rode. So we come into this Le Havre place in the morning, and you could just feel hostility. The French, when the Germans were there, their property wasn't damaged. But when the Americans come, they bombarded the city. So at the short run, they were mad at the Americans for destroying their city, but in the long run, they realized that there was no other way, and they got over it a little bit. But there was quite a strong feeling against the Americans that we caused all this damage coming in there. So we get on these cattle trucks. They're open. They got a wooden gate on the side, and it was not raining. It was just fog, damp, but enough wet that the wheels from the truck would throw up on you. When we got off, we were just caked from top to bottom with mud, and a few of the smart guys grabbed some gasoline cans to go with us. And our billet, believe it or not, was a field with a sign in the middle of it that said C-66, and it was wet. So I laid out the sleeping bag. In about a half hour, it was so wet there was no point of trying to sleep in it. And about this time, some smart guys went down the sides of the fence and tore down the post and made a big 6-foot pile of fence posts and poured the gasoline on it and lit it up, and we stood around there all morning to get dry. Next day, the officers did go and make deals with the civilians. We'd put 6 men in one room here, or 12 men was usually what it was, 12 men in one room here and 12 men in one room there. And the farmer was out there pulling his barbed wire and winding it up and looking quite disturbed, as he should. And our lieutenant went over and explained to him that the U.S. would pay for whatever damage he wanted. He just wrote him an IOU for whatever he wanted, and then the people coming behind us, he would submit that paper to them, and they would either rebuild him his fence, whatever they had, but they had some arrangement where they would pay for these guys. So we're in this one house, in one room. Upstairs is another squad in the hayloft. The rooms, the houses in France were, part of it was the house where you lived, and the other part was the barn where the cattle were. So we were sort of between the house and the barn. And on the left of us was the Lieutenant Booth with Sergeant Callahan with the fireplace. We're in a room, and upstairs with us is another squad. I think it was maybe Houghton's squad. I was in George O'Brien's squad. So Lieutenant Booth, Gabriel Callahan, Tech Sergeant of 3rd Platoon, and a fellow by the name of Bark, Private Bark, who was boxing champion of the 12th Armored Division, went making the rounds of civilians socializing and getting drunk, and when they come back they could hardly walk or talk, and Callahan and Bark always, Callahan thought he could always beat up on Bark, and Bark was willing to take him on at any time. He said, just take off your stripes. So of course he got himself in the corner, so he takes off his stripes, and the two of them get their fists up and they're circling around. They circle around so long they wore themselves down without ever throwing a punch, and there's 4 or 5 of us watching this, and my friend Glenn Toy, member of our squad, says, well, hell, I could lick both of them with one hand tied behind my back. So they circle around and got themselves so tired, they said, well, we'll stop this and we'll start it up in the morning. So up the stairs goes clump, 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 is Bark going up there, and he drops his shoe. He says, I'll get that Callahan in the morning. And of course he clumps down in the morning, and as soon as he walks into the place, why Callahan, Sergeant Booth has, or excuse me, Lieutenant Booth has 2 GIs with rifles. He said, okay, Bark, just hold it up against the wall. And they wanted to bring charges against Bark for whatever he did, and I couldn't see where he did anything. They took him out and got him drunk, and why they wanted to pull this on him, I don't know. But in any case, they wanted to court-martial him, and the guys up in the battalion were wise to this kind of stuff, so they says, well, we'll take him, and we got another fuck up, and we'll just trade the two, and that's the way it went. Nobody got court-martialed or anything. They just switched him off to left field. Bark will show up later here. So now we're off into combat, and Captain Hayner's Jeep is going down the road, and we're behind him a little bit, and all of a sudden his Jeep stops, and he jumps out, and he looks like he's running for cover, and apparently somebody had fired on him, and we're on the road, and so we're going to get off this road. So all of a sudden a big screech comes, Zeep, and it sounded like it's going in one ear and out the other, and then kaboom. And that's the way the rifle from the tank sounds like. You don't hear that from the shells that come up and down. The ones that come up and down, they go zoom. But this flat stuff, it comes in and sheet, and boy, it just scare you out of your pants. So we got off the road and started digging trenches, and I was the .30 caliber anti-aircraft missile guy, so I stood up in the track looking in case some aircraft would be coming over. And then another one of these sweeches come by, and I thought, well, that's it, boy, I'm out of there, and dug a hole faster than you ever see in your life. So we stood guard duty in that area that night, and we were close enough we could hear the big guns 3, 4, 5 miles away, and the flashes all night long. And we're going up to relieve the 4th Armored Division. It started to rain a little bit, and on our way we needed a lot of material. So everybody was asked to take some extra stuff. We had a couple extra bandoliers per rifles, a couple of mortar rounds for the 60 mortar, a couple cans of machine gun ammo, a couple of bazooka rounds. Everybody carried a couple things extra that he never used to carry. So we're following the tanks up, and the land looks flat, but the water is covering up the ditches. The tanks make ditches about 6, 8 inches, and you can't see them, and when you put your foot in one, if you put it right in, you're okay, but if you put it in the slide and the slide in, down you go, and you're covered from head to toe. So sun up, we've come up to where the 4th Armored is, and off in the distance we could see this little town Singling, and things are quiet, and there's a valley down and a valley up to the town, and I see tanks all over the hillside, and I said, well, that's good, we got a lot of support around here. And the 4th Armored Infantry Company lined up and marched away, and I talked to one of the guys. He said, well, it wasn't too bad up there, and he had some grenades on his holders, and I didn't have any. I said, well, how about giving me your grenades since you're going back? He said, well, you can go to any tank and get grenades. So I walked over to a tank and got a supply of grenades. And they said, okay, 4th Armored, let's go. So they walked out, and the company, instead of being 200 men, looked like about 50 men were left in this group, and they went off. And then the radio called for the tanks to turn, and all those tanks out in the field that I thought were our support, there was only 2 or 3 of them that were good. All the rest of them were knocked out tanks. And the Germans were in the town behind us. So we dug our holes, and one of the tankers would come up and sit behind my hole, and he'd be looking in the town with his binoculars, and he'd see the flash of the gun, and he'd kick the guy, and the guy would gun the thing away, and of course the guy that was flashing was shooting at him, so where he was is where I was, and he moved away, so I was getting the shells that were aimed at him were coming in and landing around my hole. So down in the valley, I could look down and I could see the artillery ground splashes. And one of my friends, Walter Sytak, who was a little bit older, who he couldn't hear. And I looked up, and I'm in my hole because of these artillery shells landing down the valley. And Walter's sitting up there on his raincoat, and he's cleaning his rifle, and I threw a little stone at him and pointed at the shells exploding down there, and he saw those, and boy, he goes in the hole, and he didn't come up for a long time in that. We were going to do some scouting, and Sergeant Houghton was always a guy to really go find the Germans. He really hated the SS, and he was going to go and fix them. And he couldn't wait for the other people to get ready to go. He wanted to go ahead. And in the States, I used to go on these night patrol things, but they wanted me to go with them, and I says, well, is this a duty patrol or just something you're dreaming up? And they were just dreaming it up. I said, count me out. I can wait for the duty dose. So the next day, 4 o'clock in the morning, we're attacking this town, Geising. And the plan was one squad to go down this, it was a small town, just a 2-street town, maybe 20, 30 houses. One squad went down the left side of the street, and another squad went down the right side of the street with the church and the steeple. And after they were done, my squad was supposed to go through and get 2 or 3 houses on the far end of town on the left. So here's the artillery coming down, and the man's talking on the radio, raise it up 50 yards. So he raises the barrage 50 yards, and we walk up 50 yards. And boy, have artillery like this is going to be a snap. We're just going to walk right through here like nothing. That was the one and only time I had artillery support. The rest of the war, they were somewhere else. I don't know where they were. But the one day they were really there. So they had to stop firing when we got into the town, and the first squad went and did their thing, and the Germans were there the day before, but I think they knew we were coming. We come in at 4 o'clock, and I think they left at 3:45. So we were right behind them, and the first squad did their thing, and then we went through, and Sergeant O'Brien says, okay guys, let's go. And he took off, and Avery was in front of me, and he took off, and I was the third man, and I took off, and I look around, there's nobody behind me. So here's 3 of us out of 12 that's going down here to do what the work that 12 men are supposed to do. But we went ahead anyway, and the other guys caught up with us a short time later. Come up to this house, and Sergeant wanted somebody to throw a grenade in the house, and Duncan had a grenade, and his was still in the box with the tape on it, and he was trying to get on fast, and I said, well, I'll go throw. And so I run up toward the house, and I tripped on some wire, and I fell down, and I fell right in front of a pillbox. And unfortunately, there wasn't anybody there. If there'd been any soldier occupying that, he could have reached out and touched me and killed me right there. So I throw my grenade in the house, and man, you hear this yelling and screaming, and there's civilians in the house. Nobody ever told me there was going to be civilians in the house. I thought when you fought a war, all the civilians got out. So they weren't hurt, they were scared. The grenade landed upstairs, and they were down the basement. So this one guy that owned the house came out there, and he's approaching on bail. I said, well, hold it, don't let that guy get close to you. We didn't know who he was. And he kept coming. I told him to stop, and he wouldn't stop. I had my gun pointed in the air. I fired a shot, and that got his attention, and he stopped. And then a couple hours later, the lieutenant says, well, why did you fire? I said, well, he was advancing on bail, and he wouldn't stop. You know, he kept on going. I was going to level the gun at him. They had little funny things like that. The Germans, as they pull out, have a practice of leaving 1 or 2 guys behind to be snipers. And the guys they leave behind, I think, are the fuck-ups that they want to get rid of. And of course, they know if they fire, they're going to get murdered, so they hide and give up, particularly at the end of the war, where it was just pointless to do that. So they would wait until the shooting quieted down, and they'd get some of the civilians to say, well, there's a couple guys over here that want to give up. And we'd go get their weapons and break them up. Went into the kitchen and said, well, better clean the rifle and make sure it's working. So it comes apart easily in 3 pieces, and got it on the kitchen table, and there's a guy outside yelling, we're getting attacked, and he's banging away with his rifle. And I run outside with my rifle in pieces trying to put it together and get on the ground. I look around, just couldn't see anything. He said, well, they're way up on the hill. They must have been half a mile, 3/4 mile. I don't think the rifle would shoot that far. He said, I drove him off. Pretty soon the radio message comes, would C Company please stop shooting at B Company? So they were our soldiers up there, and the guy who thought it was so things quieted down, and we had the day off. The next day we're going into Geising, and somebody's got to be first, and the squad I was in, they assigned us half a squad to one tank and half a squad to another tank, so 6 men per tank. So whatever your half squad was, you stuck together. So our half squad was leading out in front, and Duncan was in lead, and he just was terrified. And I'm only 5 steps behind him, and you know, we're about as terrified as each other can be. So we're walking down this railroad. The sun's up, about 6 in the morning, and all of a sudden they said, well, at this rate we're not going to get to the line in time, so bring up the tanks down the railroad track and mount up on the tanks and we'll ride into town. And what they forgot was that they had 5 guys 200 yards out in front of everybody else, so the first tank stopped back of us, and well, they loaded up and drove by, and so we started out being first and we ended up being left behind. So we followed these tanks as best we could and up to the top of the hill, and I knew there was one town we were supposed to attack. And I get up there and I said, I can see 3 towns. I didn't know which one was friendly, which one was enemy. And whilst we're up there looking things over, the German artillery starts coming down on us. Well, it's a good idea to get off the hill. So we got off the hill and found a barn. We had 14 guys. We had a can of machine gun ammunition, no machine gun, and a couple of sergeants, and so we decided to build a fire, get warm, have some eggs. Getting on towards sundown, so if we stay out here, we're going to have to set up a perimeter and man the thing all night long, and we just don't have enough people to do that, so nobody was saying anything, and I says, well, I don't think this is a good place to be. I know where I came from, and it's friendly. I said, I'm going back. So everybody got up and followed me back to town. And now our group is gone, and there's a new division in where we were sleeping last night. There's a new division there. I said, well, let's just screw it. You know, the Army owes us a meal every day. So I said, well, I'll just go up to this dump where they got the rations and help myself. And walk up there, and here's a guy walking guard with an M1. I said, well, maybe that's not such a good idea. So I asked him where I could find an officer, and he told me, and I gave the officer the standard rifle salute and explained who I was, and he listened to me. And so on. He said, you got any non-coms with you? And yeah, he wanted to speak to one of the non-coms. And all the time I talked to him, he was very nice, sympathetic, no problem at all. I went back and told the guys he wanted to talk to the sergeant, so sergeant comes up and he walks in and he doesn't give me a salute. Man, this guy that was so nice to me, he just took off on this sergeant like you wouldn't believe. He just rode him up and down and up and down. But finally it got all cleared out and we got our rations anyway. So now what to do? We start out the next morning to try and find our unit. And we didn't walk more than 50 yards, and down the road comes a half-track driver that we knew was Clyde Bowman. So we got in his tank and near track, and he took us back to the motor pool, and we met back up with our guys there. So we lost Bark, who wanted to fight Callahan, and we're attacking our second town, Geising, and all the tanks are on one side of the hill and the Germans on the other, and we're not moving. And they sent a bazooka team around to shoot at the German tank, and they come back and they said when they fired their bazooka, the bazooka shells hit the tank, but they bounced off. They weren't hitting it at a square enough angle. And the tank turned their gun on them and fired at them and drove them away, and our First Lieutenant, I forget his name at the moment, was directing fire for this team, and he was killed in that exchange, and that was our first battle casualty. Well, as this was happening, we're on the backside of the hill wondering what's going on, and up to me comes Bark, and he smiles, and he wants to know where Callahan is, and of course I heard about guys coming out looking for their sergeant or lieutenant, and this was the only one I ever knew of, and I think he intended to have a shot at Callahan if he could find him. And I knew where he was. He was on the tank ahead of me, and I said, well, he's around here somewhere. I haven't seen him in a while, and he gave up and he went away. But it was kind of sad that the guy would take it that far. After returning to the town and getting the rations, we went off to a place called Niederschaffelchain. And here there was a man, his mother, about a 15-year-old girl, and about a 10-year-old boy. And we again got one room in their place and probably burned up all their firewood for a whole year. And the lady, Grandma, would bring a liter of wine and a 2-liter of wine, and she'd just leave them there, and periodically she'd come in, and if they were empty, she'd fill them up, and we'd put cigarettes and chocolate and soap, and she'd take that, and she was very happy to get it. And part of our guard duty at night was to turn the half-track vehicle on every hour for 10 minutes to get it warmed and make sure it was ready to go. So coming out of the second town, which I missed, my friend Bale was very upset, and something happened which I never fully understood, but he was ordered to go ahead, and the way Bale explained it to me is they ordered him to go without any help at all. Usually, you went with 2, 3, 5, 10 people, you just didn't send one guy. But he made enough of a stink about it, and we had some problems there. So we got a new sergeant, and it was our assistant sergeant now appointed to sergeant, and we got another fellow, Lovelace, who became the assistant squad leader. Ollie comes back and he says, well, we're going to attack this Steinwall Woods, and there's 200 Germans in there. They're older troops, they're not first-line fighters, and they don't have any armored vehicles. They got about 6 trucks, and we wanted to go in there and throw a grenade in every foxhole. And we're all ready to go, and the closing statement Ollie makes is, well, this was just a practice run, we're not going to attack tonight. And he'd been building us up. I was so churned inside, I just couldn't believe they would do that. I was a man alive. He'd work us all up over nothing like that. I don't know the delay, but we got white sheeting, and it was snowy out, so we took off our equipment, put white sheets, cut holes for the arms and hands, and white sheets on the helmet, white material on the helmet, and then put the equipment on over that and would blend in with the snow. So now we're ready to, the next day, with the same plan, we're off to the woods. And we drove down to past Wyersheim and Hort, and got on the Wyersheim road to Gamseen, and between Gamseen and Herlesheim is about 3 kilometers, and right next to Gamseen is the Steinwall Woods. It's about a 1-kilometer circle of woods there. The 56 had been fighting in Herlesheim for several days and having a hard time there, and they weren't getting through. And our job was to get in the woods, and no artillery preparation, just a surprise attack was to be the way it went. So we come to the Zorn River and the Landsgraben Canal, and across the canal they had this, the engineers had set up footbridges. So there were 4 of these little bridges, and 2 on the right were for A Company, which was going to take the right side of the road, and 2 on the left was for C Company, taking the left side of the road. And away we go. And not too far from the footbridges, on my left was an American tank with their crew standing up on top. And now I realize we were on top of a flooded field, and the ice wasn't heavy enough to hold that tank, and it dropped a foot or 2 far enough to that wouldn't run. So the tank crew was just standing up on top of that, and we're going by them. And it's this ghostly dark, you can almost see, but you can't. And the snow kind of reflects a little bit of white, so you can see something. First thing I know, up ahead, they had run into a German outpost, and when you do that, well, you're quite close to wherever the firing line's going to be. And our practice was to send them out 50, 100 yards ahead, so we should have known a lot more about what was happening than that. And one of the guys got away and woke up the people behind. And the man we had thought we were going to shoot him. He was down on his knees begging for his life. And in the meantime, he's telling us to go this way. And of course, what we forgot to remember was he was the enemy, and he was sending us right into the field of fire where they had the guns aimed. And of course, that's where we went. And if we had ignored that and went straight through, we might have gotten to the Rhine River without running into that stuff. So anyway, it's about 5, 6 in the morning now, and the machine gun burst comes, and it caught a lot of our people. We were standing up, and it was flat. And before we could realize what was going on and get down, quite a few people had already been wounded. So from that point till about 10 in the morning, we were covered by fog. We couldn't really see anything. And at 10 o'clock, the sun came up and cleared the fog. But in the meantime, my sergeant, Ollie Brown, was about 10 yards to my left, and he was armed with a grenade launcher, and he wanted me to help him locate the guns that were firing, and I told him where I thought they were. And so he would lob a grenade in at them, and when I'd see all I could see was the muzzle blast. When they'd blast, I'd mark the spot and fire my clip in and reload and wait for them to fire back. Well, this kept going on all morning, and it looked to me like we weren't going to be going anywhere. And Lieutenant Watson originally called to build up a firing line, but I didn't hear him very long after the first burst. And somewhere along 9, 10 o'clock, the machine gun got set up, and they fired off 2 or 3 bursts, and then they were hit out. And about 9 o'clock, Ralph Shoulders come crawling by me, and he's going back, and I had been hit in the arm. By now, my arm flew away from me, and I thought it was blown off by artillery, but it was a rifle bullet that broke the bone, and it was laying behind me. And when I moved my arm, I could see something moving. I was real happy to have that arm back, so I grabbed it back. So Shoulders comes back from the squad on my right, which was the last one in that direction, and he said they were all killed up there, and he was going back, and I wanted him to help me unload my gear so I could crawl back too. And I was never really sure whether we were supposed to stay or go or what. I thought, well, nobody was saying get out, so if we stayed there and other people come up on the right or left, we would be there to help them. So I thought, well, we better stay. Turned out to be a bad move. And after the sun came up and cleared the thing, all of a sudden I'm hearing an American machine gun going like mad, and look up, and on top of the German position there's an M4 tank going back and forth, and he's got them all under control there. He's got them down. And after a while he had to give up and go back, and he went behind me, and now I saw there was an anti-tank gun that was, the barrel was right on the ground. And it shot one of those zip right over my head and kawoomp on the tank, and I looked back, and here's the tank has got smoke coming up out of it, and it's right in the middle of a minefield, and I couldn't tell whether the mines got it or the tank gun got it, but I think the tank gun got it. But now I realize we had walked right through that minefield earlier in the day and didn't even know that it was there. So some of the people started saying, well, maybe we should think of giving up and come back and fight another day. And that went on from about 10 till 3 in the afternoon. And anything that moved in our field, they just fire more small arms at it. And finally at 3 o'clock they said, okay, let's give up. And the white flag and the comrades and one German with a machine pistol come out looking us over, and I'm trying to decide if I try and shoot him, I probably can hit him, or maybe, but definitely I'd get killed, and maybe all these other guys ready to give up would get killed too, so I decided against trying to shoot him. And Walter Sytak wasn't wounded. He's a guy that couldn't hear, and he walked in with me and he says, let me help you, and they'll probably treat me better if I come carrying a wounded guy in. So that was his strategy to come in. And I only saw one dead German on the line there, and I saw George O'Brien, who used to be my squad sergeant, who is now in the mortar squad, and I heard Charlie Fitt's voice, and Avery Deaton talked to me, and as I was sitting up by the aid station, my first thought was they're just going to move us over the hill where the guys behind us can't see us and gun us down. Got to the pillbox there, and the German medical man started cutting my jacket to get at the wound and bandage it up. So I figured, well, once he's doing that, he wouldn't be wasting his time if they were going to shoot us. So I felt a lot better after that. While I was there, George Harms comes running in, hands up and yelling, "Nix Compris, Nix Compris." And of course, Nix is German for no, and Compris is understand in French. And the Germans just thought this was real funny, a guy saying Nix Compris. So while I'm getting my arm bandaged up, he gave me my own bandage. Every soldier has his own bandage, and my sulfa drugs, sulfa pills. A German tank come out of the woods and went past towards our lines, and the tank commander gives the standard Heil to the officer on the pillbox, and the officer of the police, he's real professional, he gives him the salute back. And then 4 P-47s come over, and they have 2 500-pound bombs, 1 on each wing, and 8 machine guns. And they come down, follow the leader one at a time, and drop 1 bomb, and then they circle up and down and drop the second bomb, and up and down, and 8 machine guns, which makes more racket than you ever heard in your life when they all 8 go off at once. And 2 passes of that, and then they're away. Well, one of those bombs apparently got this tank that had just pulled out, and the guy is running back, and he wants help to get his wounded out of his tank there. The Germans separated the wounded and non-wounded and walked the non-wounded away right away, so they wouldn't be subject to any more small arms or artillery fire from either side. And the wounded, we got together in a barn and stayed there. There were 2 aid men that I hadn't known before. One of them was Alex Bien, and the other one Tom Torcia. We were assigned to our 66, and they stayed with us, and there was about 5 people there, and 2 or 3 men had died during the night, and O'Brien thought one of them was our friend Carl Orsman in the mortar squad, and another one from the tankers. And this man from the tankers looked like a 15-year-old boy, and his hair was cut short like a crew cut, and apparently phosphorus had gotten onto him and burned holes through his body. You could put your finger in the holes that were, this phosphorus burns through you. Ollie Brown was also killed with phosphorus exploding. His upper body was all burned. My friend Bales, he had his head blown off, and another one of our squad, Jim Johnson, had his hands blown off, and Schultz was killed there. Out of 12 men, there was 4 or 5 of us killed. Deaton and myself and Cytek survived, and Lovelace was wounded. I met up with him later. So the next day, they took me by horse cart to the Rhine River, which was only a couple miles away. From the pillbox to the barn, there's a railroad that runs between Hurlesheim-Gamsien and a road that runs between them, and they sort of cross in between. And there was a machine gun at this railroad backing up the pillbox guys, and behind that looked like a 105 artillery piece with a 5-man crew real close in there. So we went past this bunch and into the Rhine River, and every 50 yards there was, it looked to me like a 50 caliber water-cooled gun standing there on a mount about 6 foot high, and unmanned, pointing in the air, but just waiting for somebody to come and use it to fight off aircraft if aircraft came from the Allied side. So they loaded me from the ox cart, which had room for 2 horses, but they only had 1 horse pulling it, so it was sort of pulling it lopsided. And they unloaded myself and 3 or 4 other guys into the German ambulance and put us on a pontoon, and with an outboard motor we putted across the Rhine River. And it was just, outboard motor had a shaft, maybe 4 or 5 feet long. It looked like maybe a 3 or 5 horsepower, not really big motor. Anyway, we got across the river, ambulance ride into a town called Baden-Baden, and the Hotel Europa there, which is famous in peacetime, was turned into a German hospital, and not having anything else to do with us, they put us in with the Germans. And the man in charge was about a 5-foot colonel with steel-rimmed glasses and shiny boots all the way up to his hips, and everybody really listened to this guy. When he came around, everybody followed around behind him, and yes, yes. And in front of him was a big sergeant, and he still thought Germany was winning the war. He stamped like an elephant and Heil Hitler, in that room he shook when he stamped and yelled. Couldn't believe the guy was still carrying on, but he was still believing they were going to win. I met a lieutenant from A Company, Burton Brown, who apparently tried to escape and was recaptured, and then there was a colonel from 43rd Tank, Novosel, and in the same room I was in was Torchy, the medic, and Alex, the medic. And they put a splint around, body cast around me with a splint between the two, so in effect I had a broken arm. And when I was originally hit, I was worried, well, maybe I'm bleeding to death. Unfortunately, there was no blood. There were a few drops of blood, but there's not danger of bleeding, so I was real fortunate on that. And I was laying on the ground. That shell just a foot over to the right or left would have gone right down through my center of my body and been fatal. So I was real fortunate to get out. There were several people killed there, maybe 60, 80 killed, 60, 80 captured. The whole company was practically, all the combat troops were gone, the drivers were left. This colonel would come around, and a man from another division by the name of Barnes, he was quite worried that his name sounded Jewish and they would think he was Jewish, so he was very careful to tell them how to pronounce his name. And they said, they put a bandage on him, and they said, well, next, I was listening to this in German and kind of piecing together a little word here and there. It sounded to me like they were telling him next Monday to come down to the first floor, and there's a room they called the bandage room, and come in and get your bandage changed. And they told him 2 or 3 times, and nobody was getting it. And finally I said, well, I think what they're telling you is next Monday they want you to come down at 9 o'clock and go to their bandage room. When they heard me talking about it, a whole bunch of them coming in, yabber, 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 like I could understand every word they said, and I couldn't understand any of it, but at least they pieced together enough to tell this guy to go down and get his thing. I ran into a young German, about the same age, and we played chess, and I figured, well, they were going to take my good gloves away anyway, so I gave them to him as a gift, and he was very happy to get them. He thought I was giving him something, but I thought they would get stolen anyway. Colonel Novosel was concerned that I shouldn't beat this guy in chess. He thought we would get better treatment. It never occurred to me that it had anything to do with it, but the Colonel Novosel was a little concerned that I shouldn't try and win the game. So anyway, a week or so later, we're off, 5 of us, to another same deal. It's a high school or a school that's been turned into a German hospital, and we're still with the Germans. Now it's myself, Novosel, maybe Bien, and 5 or 6 guys all told. And they gave us pajamas, so when we got up to walk around, we looked just like German soldiers. And when they served the food, we'd get in line and get our first, and then if there was anything left, we'd go get seconds, and the Germans would give us a dirty look because we were the Americans taking their food. So we had a ride from there on a train, and there was a lot of air activity. P-47s would come over and give these trains trouble. And as soon as the train heard there was an airplane in the area, he'd back into the tunnel. And then when it was clear, he'd come out, and then the airplane would come close, he'd back into the tunnel. So we'd go back and forth. Well, once we didn't get back, we were out in the open, and everybody got off the train and run. The guard run one way, and I run the other. There was only one guard and me on that train. We got back to together and ended up at the Allied Hospital down in Rottenmunster. It was for French, English, American, Polish, Russian, all the all the prisoners were in there, and that's where I stayed until the war was over in April 24. So I got in there about, captured 16th of January, and I was prisoner in there until April 28th, and they 24th possibly. They come by, and when I was in still a German hospital, and said, "Your leader's dead." That's when President Roosevelt died. And they were under the impression that because our leader died, that we were going to surrender. They thought that that meant that the U.S. lost the war, the leader died, and none of the soldiers reacted that way, and they were very puzzled that it didn't bother us that our leader was gone and we had lost the war. They were convinced that they were winning. Well, they found out that wasn't so. At the hospital, every once in a while we'd get an air raid, and they'd blow the whistle and go down to the basement. And I said, "Well, I'm going to stay up on top and watch one of these air raids." And well, they started dropping bombs close, and the building was shaking like nothing. I said, "Well, I better go to the basement." And I'll go down to the basement. When the French army came through, and we could hear them burst way off in the distance and then getting closer and closer. And finally the German army retreated on foot past our, I think the place had been some kind of an academy or something converted into a prison camp. The Germans walked by, and then there was a tremendous blast in town where I guess they blew the bridge. And then the French came by, and it was all quiet, and pretty soon we were liberated and repatriated. The guards had made deals with individual prisoners that they knew that they would sponsor them and take care of them when the liberating troops come through. So I had they asked to go out on detail, and myself and another American went. This other guy had a patch over his eye. He had a German Luger, and I had one of the German rifles, and five shots in the chamber, 5 shots in the magazine, and we were the guard detail for the people from the hospital. Went out into the field, and there were 2 Germans that had tried to run up the hill and got machine gunned down, and one of them was a young guy, maybe 20, 22, and he blonde hair, and the bullets went right up his back and destroyed his pack and everything, and he was laying on the ground with one arm up like that, and he was frozen there. And a little ways ahead of him was an older fellow around 50, and it turned out that this older man was the Home Guard, National Guard, whatever you call it, Voistrom or Volkstrom, and he was the father of one of the men that was with me in the detail. And this guy just started mumbling and rumbling, and boy, I thought we had gotten into more than we wanted to handle. So the kid with the Luger, he got the Luger out and cocked it, and I got the safety off my gun and backed up, and he mumbled and mumbled for a while, and finally he settled down and we got into town. But that was a little bit scary. Here I am, I can't even handle the gun probably, and out there on a guard detail with these guys. The next day they come in ambulances and took us up to Stuttgart, and Stuttgart was ruins, and the people were all out there with shovels and picks and moving the rocks off the road, and we went through there, come to an air evac hospital, and there they asked us about what did we know here, and of course I knew of a couple soldiers that had died, one in the barn and one in the hospital and here and there. So everybody gave his story, and I suppose later on they put all of that together. Had another, it was C-47 ride, another C-47 ride, the second hospital, and I ran into my friend Orville Hatley, who was the track driver. Bowman was the driver and Hatley was the assistant, and he's in there, and we had a nice little talk. And then in the bed next to me was a colored man, and he had a wound in his back where the bullet had gone down, and it made a tear-shaped wound where the bullet went in, and then there was a piece of skin, and then another where it entered. So it went down just like he was laying on a tank, and the bullet went along the ground and went in his back and out. Come to find out, he's in 66C, but he's D Company. And when I was there, we had no D Company. We only had ABC. And what happened as the troops were getting hit hard in the Battle of the Bulge and the ground guys were getting casualties, they needed replacements. So they were taking everybody in the Air Corps and training them to be infantrymen and sending them over to help out and be replacements. And the colored troops had not been selected for battle for some reason, but they wanted to. So they took them as volunteers, but they didn't mix them in with the ABC companies. They made a special provisional company D. So in 66 we had a provisional D company, 56th Battalion had a provisional D company, and 17th had a provisional, and they did quite well, and everybody was quite pleased with the way they performed. Len Toy was in my squad, and later on he was involved in that Steinwald thing. He got out somehow, and he was a good guy, and they promoted him to sergeant and then to lieutenant, and he was the lieutenant of one of these platoons in D Company. Coming into Paris 1, I think it was Lucky Strike, and they checked us over and so on. Along the way, I would find that they wanted me to have a full set of everything, so they issued me 2 of these and 3 of those, and I thought, what do I need all this stuff for? I wasn't going to carry that. In the meantime, all these refugees were out there, and somebody would come up, I'd give them trousers, I'd give them a shirt, I'd give them boots, and when I left, all I had was what I was wearing, and the next place they'd load me up again, and I'd find somebody else to give it to. I must have given away about 20 sets of U.S. stuff. But I thought, well, we're over there to help them, and they looked like they needed it more than I did. And they were all very happy. I probably got some of them in trouble. They probably had a hard time explaining how they got this new stuff. I'm looking out my window, and here's a boulevard that's about 6 foot wide with gravel, and there's an MP, he's guarding 3 German soldiers, and they've got a water roller. If you remember how you roll your lawn, you filled up one of these rollers with water and flatten it out. Well, he had them rolling this around the thing, flattening out the driveway. And he had those guys terrified. He had a billy club, and he'd come up behind them and whack them on the butt. And I'm watching this for about 10, 15 minutes. I can't take that, so I opened up the window and I yelled at him to cut it out. And he got the message. He stopped beating up on these guys. When you went ready to get home, they did a thing called ZI, Zone of Interior. That was your message you were going home. So no matter where you were on the thing, they'd come over the loudspeaker and they'd give your name and they'd say, report to so on, you've been ZI'd. Well, like my furlough was canceled immediately, it took 2 weeks to get there. ZI was the same thing. You were rushed down to the orderly room and they were going to ship you out 3 days later, you know, so they just had misconception of what emergencies were. But that's the way the Army worked. I flew in a C-54 from Paris to Azores. We landed, refueled, and then on to Newfoundland, but we had such good wind they just kept on going, and they came into the mainland in Maine, and it turned out that I had an aunt living there, aunt and uncle. So they come out to see me, and I was showing my aunt what was wrong with me, and I said, our arm is hanging down and I'm not getting any, I can't move it. So from January to June it hadn't moved, and now in June 6th this little finger just moved a little bit. So since then it started improving. I have residual paralysis and loss of strength, but in general I'm able to do everything I want. I played football and I played basketball and golf and everything. I used to be able to drive 250 yards, but now I can only drive about 100 yards. My arm is given up. We went to C-47 ride to Heinz General in Chicago, and there they had Italian prisoners of war. They had spanking uniforms just like the U.S. Army, the sun, we call them the suntans, and a huge oval football with Italy on it. And the guys were coming out with limousines and taking these guys into town. And here I was a U.S. soldier and I couldn't get a pass. I just figured this was not very good. They did all the work around the camp, the KP, the cooking and the cleanup. And when we went through the mess hall, when you wanted something, you put your tray out and they slapped it on. And if you didn't want it, you held your tray back and went to the next place. Well, this guy that was serving the food, he thought everybody had to take everything, and I had pulled my tray back and he didn't see it. He slams it on the floor. Oh, it was the biggest bunch of commotion, and then get the mop and all that stuff there. I just, you know. As POWs, we were entitled to a 60-day recovery furlough and a promotion 1 grade. So when I got to Chicago, I asked for my 60-day furlough, and they weren't up to date on what it was, so they didn't give it to me. They gave me a weekend pass, and it's only a couple hundred miles to my home in Lansing. I was there, let's say June, got in there maybe October, no, before October. I got transferred to Percy Jones at Fort Custer. And that's the same place that I was inducted, and I'm almost convinced that I inducted in one barracks, and I got discharged from the barracks right next door. But anyhow, I had the 60-day furlough that I wanted, so I applied for it, and they wouldn't give me 60, they'd give me 30. So I wanted to see my sister in San Francisco, and a friend of mine was in Sioux Falls, and another friend was in Albuquerque. So I hitchhiked to Chicago and went out to the air base, and in those days, if you were in uniform, you could ride any airplane that was going anywhere that the pilot was willing to take you. You had to have a parachute, and if he had one in the plane, it was okay, or if you could borrow one from the base, it was okay. But it was up to the pilot whether he wanted to fly you or not. So I'm there from 10 in the morning till 5 at night, and finally the guy says, 1 ride, and I said, I'll take it. And he's going to Coffeyville, Kansas, and I don't care, I'll take it. He said, what's going the wrong way? I don't care, I'll take it. Well, what happened was I didn't know that where Coffeyville was, and I was either going to go to Albuquerque or to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So I got out there to this airplane, and it's a P-38 twin engine, and what they had done was remove the radio from behind the pilot, and when their people got a furlough, they would ride him closest airport to his town, and he'd get a day's head start on his furlough, and then when he's going back empty, so he's willing to take somebody. So I got a ride in the P-38. He sits on the end of the runway, and he opens up the motors, and then he raises the brakes off, and the plane goes up about 45-degree angle, and it turns like, and I'm looking out and looking at the ground, and he buzzed the Chicago airport for me. So off we go to Coffeyville, and he's flying by radio. And what you do is you tune in the station that's in front of you where you want to go in the 360-degree, and you just keep the arrow pointed at the city, and when you fly over the city, the arrow turns around and it's behind you, and then you pick up another one. Oh, I could fly that airplane, you know, to get there. So we're coming in at dark, and he radios for instructions, and he's there. And they say, land it and park it over there. So he does. He lands it. It's dark, finds his way, puts it over there, turns the motor off, and almost immediately there's a Jeep there with a couple guys. And I said, well, we want you to move it. And he said, well, it's where he told me to park it. He said, well, we want you to move it. Start up the engine. So he starts up the engine, and it was quite common that they would catch fire. The turbocharger was glowing red, and top fire. I looked down the pilot waiting for him to get out of this thing, and he wasn't moving, so I figured, well, he knows what he's doing, and it doesn't bother him, it shouldn't bother me. And of the two guys out there, one of them had a little fire extinguisher, about a quart, and he's trying to put out this fire that's about 3-4 foot behind the engine. And he said, well, sometimes you just open up the throttle and it blows it out. So he said, oh, try it. So he opens up the throttle and the 3 foot becomes 20 foot. And by this time the fire department's there and they're coating us down with foam and put the fire out. So I got a bus. I couldn't get a ride out of there. So I got a bus ride up to Sioux Falls and met my buddy Merlin Johnson from high school. And I had met him before in Ardmore before I went overseas. And when his crew was on training, he'd get permission from his pilot, and I'd go up with him, and I'd get a ride in the B-17 and landings up and down, and I'd go all over the place, go in the front, go up in the top turret, and go to the waist, and go to the back. My buddy was a tail gunner to go back there, so I got to go all over the airplane. Got a 47 ride out of there to Lincoln, Tinker Field, and it was a B-25. And the guy had something where the bomb bays were, they had now had a gas tank or something. And he says, well, the plane is unbalanced, would you mind climbing over that and getting the tail and giving us a bounce? So I climbed over this thing and got in the tail of B-25, and down we come at Tinker, okay. Sometimes they had 29s flying from Tinker to LA and San Francisco where I wanted to go, and they weren't doing it. So after a day I gave up, and another guy from the Air Force was getting the furlough. He said, let's go hitchhike. So we got out on Route 66 and hitchhiked to LA and San Francisco, and I spent a couple weeks there with my sister. She had gone through a divorce in Nevada, and I wanted to see if maybe there was something I could do to convince her to stay with her husband, who was a soldier, but it was way past that, and she was convinced it would never work. So we had a nice visit, and up till now, everybody I met was real nice to GIs. They'd buy you drinks, they'd buy you food, they'd give you a ride, everything. So it wasn't costing me any money on this whole trip. I had $50 when I started, and I had $50 when I come back. And I said, well, I don't want to hitchhike back. So I'll take the train. And the Spirit of St. Louis, I think, was about a $50 ticket in those days. And I got back to home, and at Fort Custer there, I said, well, I'd like my other 30-day furlough. And they said, well, we got you all set up for a discharge. So I said, okay. So I took the discharge, and the way it works, if you have unused leave, they pay you for it. It was very good, very fair arrangement there. So October 43, I'm 45, I'm out of the service. I have a discharge on a disability section, and of course now when I go to work, anybody that sees you got a disability, they don't want to hire you because you're disabled. Well, I wasn't that bad that I couldn't work, but all you had to do was on your application, if you wrote the word disability, they didn't call you for an interview. So years and years later you learned, well, you just left that blank or said no. I tried to get a job at Oldsmobile, and I couldn't. And my mother knew some people who worked in the office who were friends of hers and owed her some favors, so they got me a second interview, and I got a job and I worked there. I'd work when school was off, and then when college was on, I'd go to college. I'd take a temporary leave, and I'd come back. And after 3 or 4 years, the guy says, oh, you got seniority. So that meant I was a year on the payroll, and every time I came, I got preference over anybody that hadn't worked a year. So it worked out pretty nice. But I got my degree in electrical engineering from Michigan State in 1950. And my first job was with IBM, and I hired in at Detroit as a service man, and went to Endicott, New York, and got some training on all the equipment. And then I reported back to Lansing, where I worked for 5 years, and I finally decided that the demand and the pay of that job was just too limited. I wasn't going to ever reach my financial goals, so I decided to leave. In the meantime, at Lansing, I had married my present wife in '49. We still had a year of college, but we thought we could handle it, and it was unexpected, and we had a lot of problems, but we did manage it. And the houses that we could afford to live in were, you wouldn't live in them. They were chicken coops and converted garages and basements and attics. So my father-in-law says, well, why don't we build you a house? So, okay, we had a little bit of money. We bought a piece of land for $750, dug the trench, laid the footing, laid the blocks up, and my father-in-law did the plumbing and I did the electrical, and together we did the carpentry, and we got the roof on, got it all set, and now it's going to be plastered. So we hired a guy to plaster it for $600, and we hired the heating plant from my brother-in-law for $400 or $500, and the finished carpentry was the expensive thing. It was $1,100, and that was the rest of the stuff we did ourselves. Between my father and myself, we put the roof on, and studding and rough carpentry and all that. Total cost of that thing was about $7,500. And when I left, we sold it for $10,000, and the lady buying it was a close approval. And the real estate asked if she could move in because she would have to make a double move. So we let her move in, and no mention of any rent, so she lived off us for free. And it turned out she couldn't qualify for the loan, so she was not only there a couple of weeks without paying us, she was there about 4, 5, 6 months while we got other financing, and she finally did buy the place. At that point, we had one child born in Poughkeepsie, New York in '52, Ruth Ann, and then Gerard was born in Lansing in '53, and Alice was born in Lansing in '54. When I decided, well, we're not going to financially make it here, and I loved Lansing, I loved the house we were in, we had everything we wanted except the financial advancement just wasn't there, and I could see that Lansing didn't have the kind of jobs that I was looking for. So once IBM found out I was leaving, thinking of leaving, they offered me a job in the plant and gave me a very nice promotion. So we moved up to Poughkeepsie for 5 years, and there we had 2 more children, Vincent and then Stephanie. One of my friends that did the same kind of work as I did was named Tom Jerry, and my boy Gerard heard his name, Tom Jerry. He just broke out laughing. He says, you got 3 first names, Tom, Jan, and Jerry. He was the godfather of the little youngest girl there, and we played some golf together and had a good time. Again, I looked like, well, my career was ending in a dead end and I should move on, and up till now I had planned on living, working with IBM till retirement and counting on them for all of my insurance, life insurance and hospitalized. Well, if I don't have that, I'm going to have to buy my own. I purchased a 5,000 policy and a 15, and years later these turned out to be little gold mines. People advise you don't buy insurance as investment, which is true, but I needed it for a state establishment to pay off in case something had happened to me. My wife would have a little money to pay off the debts there. Went from IBM in Poughkeepsie to Paramus, New Jersey, and worked on a military project. It was all my time with IBM was office equipment and computers in Poughkeepsie. So I had a good background in computers and office equipment and communications, and it fit in with this military project, and they were setting up a command and control system, national and international. There were 70 airports in the network. Each one of them was its own computer type station, and then 4 major switching centers. They only activated 2 of them, one in Omaha and one in New Orleans. The one in Andover in California were for the future. But I got a lot of good experience on that job, and we installed it. The Army was happy with it. That project came over. I moved to Massillon, Ohio, and worked for Goodyear Electronics, and we were doing naval research and development, Air Force research and development. And I worked on there, got some good experience for about 3 years, and looking at my future, I says, well, I'm not getting anywhere. As every time I save a few $1,000s, I have to spend it on the move. So companies will give you all kinds of benefits to move, and if you work with the company moving for that, they give you better benefits. But in any case, it never covers the real cost. You're stuck with a lot of things that don't get reimbursed. So I see us every year, we're on the first year of a 30-year mortgage, zero cash balance. And the house is bigger and all that, but I could see myself becoming 65 and having a big house, first payment of a 30-year mortgage. So we decided not to do chasing the contracts anymore, and we said, well, we'll go to a place and take whatever work, and we decided that place would be Washington, D.C. We moved there in 1966, still living there. The 6 children are all up, 5 of them are married. They all own houses, have 13 grandchildren. Ruth, the oldest girl, had 4 children. She married a man from Sudan, so she got involved with mixed culture, and she just, after 25 years, decided it was more than she could take, and she went through a divorce. In the meantime, she had 4 children. Tima, who's now 23, 24, graduated from college, working for Booz Allen, doing very well. The next boy, Buddy, he's 20, working at a nursery place. The girl is graduating next year. She's a senior. And the 4th boy died a couple years ago. He had some kind of lymphoma, and he was on a special program in NIH there. Got a lot of medical treatment and so on, but he needed bone marrow that would counteract his lymphoma, and his father proved to be a donor, but it didn't take, and he died very shortly. It was probably about 3 years ago that Ludi died. The second girl, she went through a divorce about 5 years ago, remarried, has another child for a total of 4. The oldest boy is married. They have no children, just Gerard and Carla. He's very good in computers and doing well. And the next boy is in computers. He married a lady that's also in computers. They have 3 nice little children. The daughter, Stephanie, is married. She has 3 little boys, and they're 12, 14, and they're setting all kinds of records in the sports in Manassas. They're the champs in swimming and soccer, so they're breaking records that have stood for years and years. She's very involved, very happy with it. The last guy, Matthew, he's bought a house, but he's unmarried. And he was born in 60 to 63 when we were living in Massillon, Ohio. And he was the last one out of the house, and going to college. And after a couple of years, he changed from chemical to civil engineering. And he wanted to pay me the extra, and I said, no, as long as the children are trying, we're standing expense. So he switched. It took 5 years to do a 4-year course. And backing up to the other kids, I had 3 in college at one time, and I was out of work. So I said, well, I can pay your expenses in September, and in January I can pay your expenses, but next January you better have the money from somewhere else, because I won't have it. So they got the message, and they all went out and earned their money, and my situation improved, so I wasn't as bad as I painted to them, but I wanted them to be prepared that they needed money. They had to get it from somewhere. So now my son Vincent was repairing tires, selling tires, installing them, and in a couple of weeks he was going to change jobs for a nickel an hour, and don't do that. I went down to recruiting in the Army and found out what they paid, and I come back and gave him the news that the Army was paying more than the tire guys were. In 2 years he could get college, and about 3 years, 3 days he says, okay. So he went off to service for 2 years. Spent a year and a half in the M1 Abrams tank that we saw out here in the parking lot in Germany. He did quite well. Got all the promotions and stuff that you could get in 2 years, and saved himself about $5,000 and put himself through college, 5-year course. I worked for UNIVAC in Washington in '66, had a job in the Army War Room. We kept track of all the stuff going on in Vietnam. And a year later I worked for the same company. We had the manned space program, and we were sending people into space, and I had about 40 programmers working for me there. In the Pentagon I had about 25 people. I worked real hard, and the jobs were successful, and the pay reward didn't seem to be very much, so I said, well, I can get along without all that hard work. And I stopped working the 24-hour days, 7 days a week, which some people think that you owe it to them. So I did end up getting a job in the Department of Commerce, and I worked as a licensing officer for 22 years and retired from them in 1995. All the kids are grown and gone, and I'm taking it easy. I have a hobby of playing bridge, and since '70s I've been going to 3 tournaments a year wherever they are around the country, and having a good time. My wife was a nurse when I met her in '44, and she nursed a couple years. Then the children came, and she retired nursing and was a housewife. And '72, '74, when I was telling the kids that I didn't have the money, I was out of work for a year or so, and wanted to move to a cheaper place. And I said, do you like it? And no, she wanted to stay where we were. So I said, well, we can do it if you go back to work. So she had fortunately kept her licenses active, and they were transferable. And after she said she'd go to work, it took her 6 months to finally get up and go. But we made it. We're very happy. Everything is fine. 50 years ago, I didn't think I would be here. We thought it was all over in Steinwall Woods. And here we are, and I'm very thankful. Thank you very much.